I am very happy to welcome you all to the third of today's panel discussions during this year's Vision Zero Cities Conference by Transportation Alternatives. Our panel today is titled Towards Self-Enforcing Streets. I also encourage you to tune in again after this panel at 4:45 p.m. Eastern Time for the Vision Zero's vignettes featuring 5 guests, each with quick 10-minute individual sessions. So welcome, my name is Marco Connor DiAquoi, and I am Deputy Director at Transportation Alternatives. I want to start with a few highly disturbing examples. I'm warning you with that, a few highly disturbing examples of the need for this very policy discussion about policing, enforcement, and designing for safe streets. In August of last year, Dijon Kise, age 29, was shot 16 times and killed by deputies who tried to stop him for riding his bicycle on the wrong side of the street in South LA. In 2014, Noel Aguilar was riding his bicycle on a sidewalk when he looked at a couple of LA deputies and quickly pedaled away. Within minutes of what began as a routine encounter, this 23-year-old man was dead with 3 rounds in his back. And in April of 2015, Walter Scott, age 50, was shot in the back in North Charleston, South Carolina, after being stopped by a police officer for a broken taillight. 3 months later, Samuel DuBose, age 43, was shot after being stopped in Cincinnati, Ohio, for lacking a front license plate on his car. And in July of 2016, Philando Castile was shot and killed by a police officer near St. Paul, Minnesota, with his girlfriend and her 4-year-old daughter in the car while allegedly reaching for identification. And according to police radio transcripts, the officer who stopped Mr. Castile did so because he believed Mr. Castile looked like a suspect in a robbery due to his quote unquote wide set nose. And all 3 victims that are last described here were African American. And these are not just a few bad apples causing harmful interactions. It's clear that these issues are systemic and institutional. In New York City, more than 500,000 young Black and brown men were stopped and frisked annually at the height of the NYPD stop and frisk policy, with extreme racial disparities and little to no documented impact on improving safety. And similar racial disparities exist for jaywalking and for biking on the sidewalk in New York City and elsewhere across the country. So today's panel is based on the premise that the terrible incidents I just gave a few examples of can be avoided, that enforcement is often the least effective traffic safety tool, and that designing for safety is the best way to achieve traffic and street safety. In fact, it's impossible to make a good decision if the infrastructure doesn't let you. And so the best example I like to give is protected bike lanes, where biking on the sidewalk in some places drops by as much as 90% when a protected bike lane is installed, essentially nearly negating the need for any enforcement to begin with and making the street safer for all road users. So localities across the country, from Minnesota to California and New York, are reimagining traffic enforcement right now amid calls also for police reform. And among others, the New York State Attorney General, Tish James, has called for police to end routine discretionary traffic stops. And so I'm incredibly grateful for each of the panelists who are here today. Each person today brings a wealth of experience and insight to this discussion. We are joined today by Marisa Trujillo de Mol, who is the Senior Engineering Associate of the Portland Bureau of Transportation. We are joined by Linda Bailey, Vision Zero Director of the Washington, D.C. Department of Transportation. We are joined by Chris Bombardier, Government and Public Affairs Consultant focusing on New York City and representing one of the world's largest automated enforcement companies, Vera Mobility, and Council Member Ydanis Rodriguez, who is Chair of the Transportation Committee in New York City. Before handing it over to our panelists, I want to describe today's format briefly. First, each panelist will give a brief presentation, and that should take us through about 3:40 p.m. That will be followed by some questions from me and Q&A from you as the audience. So please post your questions. And with that, I want to hand it over to our first panelist, Marisa, with the Portland Bureau of Transportation. Marisa?
Thank you, Marco. And I'm gonna be honest, I was feeling a little nauseous today, and your reminder of how serious this issue is, it's a lot to take in. So thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to present information about where Portland is on this issue right now. My name is Marisa Trujillo. I do like to just explain a little bit about me because I have a pretty unique background. I'm from New Mexico originally. My family are native New Mexicans. I am a mother, I'm a partner. I used to be a labor organizer, and I was a political organizer and staffer for about 10 years. And then following that, I went and got a degree in civil engineering, like you do. And now I am a traffic engineer at the city of Portland. So I think the most important thing for folks to know about me is that I am not the Vision Zero specialist at my bureau. We have an incredible Vision Zero team that includes our city traffic engineer, who's Wendy Colley, our program manager, that's Clay Vega, and they do wonderful Vision Zero work, and you can find it at our website, which is at the bottom of my slide. They've also created this dashboard that gives you a really quick summary of the work that we're doing. That was created by Ana Maria Perez. I'm going to shout out a lot of my teammates because none of this work is mine. It's all the teamwork that we've done together. So I am a traffic engineer who specializes in equity, and that's really the perspective that I'm going to be giving you today. So in PBOT's Vision Zero plan, we have a role for enforcement, automated and in person. However, in 2020, Portland Police Bureau dissolved their traffic division due to staffing shortages and as a response to a very well-publicized tension between our activists and the budget cutbacks as a result of some of the police protests that we had. So we saw traffic enforcement drop by 70%, maybe 90%, depending on the day. And so in Portland at this time, we have virtually no enforcement. We hope to partner with PBB again. That is a plan to work on a safe and equitable way for them to address traffic stops. But until that time, we are currently functioning in that place of self-enforcing streets. Internally, around the same period, BIPOC staff at Portland were re-envisioning how we discuss safety issues. They wanted to challenge the idea of traffic safety. And the result was this internal problem statement in a document called Beyond Traffic Safety. This won't be published, but this is sort of information that I think explains sort of where we are right now as a bureau. It was created using results-based accountability to take sort of a broader view. And what we learned in that was that our singular focus on traffic safety centers a white perspective. Achieving a white-centric personal safety has really often meant the removal of people of color from their neighborhoods and streets. Upholding white comfort in their transportation investment priorities has made people of color less safe and healthy. And so ultimately, we will not have a safe multimodal street without addressing racism. So this is one big piece of the puzzle, and the police is another really big piece of the puzzle about where we are and the way that we want working to address racism at the Bureau right now is by bringing people along from the start. And this is sort of where I come in. So what is the role of a transportation engineer in addressing racism? Well, back in 2017, I wrote an article entitled, "It's Time for Transportation Engineers to Address Racial Equity." So I'm uniquely suited to kind of fit this position. And my argument was really that understanding racism is the key to understanding the history of our infrastructure and how we move towards safer environment. We know the vulnerability of Black, Indigenous, and low-income people on our streets is very well researched for decades and decades. And so if we understand that transportation and traffic engineers are responsible for this infrastructure, we have to understand that it is our role to address and understand racism, and then further to understand racial equity. So at PBOT right now, we have created an engineering equity committee, and the role of this committee is as an advisory group to our city traffic engineer. We are representative from each section inside of engineering services and traffic systems with the goal to meet these transportation justice goals, racial equity goals that are citywide goals, but also like bureau specific. The expected outcome is for accountability for the PBOT's equity goals, like I said, the transportation justice goals, but it's also to identify where engineers and employees of engineering services have independent decision-making and to utilize that to create a more equitable decision-making and design practice. So let's back to this idea of self-enforcing streets. So what does this mean? Well, in the same way that we hope to continue to partner with the police on an equitable way to do their job, we want to make sure that the engineers who are currently designing and installing our work are doing it in the most equitable way possible. Many of our projects have advocates, planners who are equity focused and bringing us these equitable decisions. And those go through the planning and programming and ultimate to the engineering process. So we want to make sure that we're taking that to the finish line, those equitable decisions. So we work to redesign corridors in East County. That's kind of an area of Portland with high rates of traffic crashes and fatalities. And this area is also our most diverse. It has a high numbers of low-income families, high numbers of ESL households. And so I'm showing here a safety project from my coworker, Andy Sullivan. And this took 5 lanes, took it down to 3 lanes. We added pedestrian safety. We added parking protected bike lanes. We reduced speeds from 40 miles an hour to 30 miles an hour. We did that citywide. We did citywide speed reduction. And so you can see here why this was so critical. We have this vulnerable population of people of color, low-income people, ESL people, and so these incredibly dangerous streets. And so we end up with these high rates of traffic fatalities and crashes, right? So across the city right now, we're working on safety projects, small and large, to achieve the dual goals of transportation justice and safety. In truth, I could talk about this issue for a very long time. As you can see, I threw out a lot of ideas. It's something that's really near and dear to the work of the engineers at the city of Portland, but I want to make sure all of my co-panelists have all of their time. So thank you so much. And I look forward to your questions at the end.
Thank you, Marisa. And Linda with the Washington, D.C. Department of Transportation.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. And Marco, that was a good intro, although really underscores the seriousness of what we're talking about, and also the seriousness of traffic fatalities in general and the traffic safety space. And so I'm glad that we're all come together today to talk about this issue and how can we get to a really better place. I'm basically going to go through a little bit about our Vision Zero program and how it interfaces with, I guess, 24/7 safety. Like, how do we get to a street that is designed to reinforce that at all hours, as well as I'll talk a little bit about our automated enforcement program in DC. Go ahead. Sam, yeah, thanks. I put this picture in here because this is literally what I did this morning. I went to the scene of a crash at the corner of Wheeler Road and Mississippi Avenue Southeast in Washington, D.C. On the ground, you see my colleague from Roadway Operations Patrol. They were moving the car to get it out of the intersection, which unfortunately had been blocking part of the intersection operation during school drop-off time. And there was an injury crash involving 2 school children at this intersection just weeks ago, which is why I was called to the scene when this occurred this morning. Just as to further paint the picture of what we're dealing with, the car you see, no injuries, happily no injuries occurred in this crash, which was apparently very high speed. The red car you might see in the background was reported to have run the red light at full speed. The driver of that car fled the scene on foot. And I'm not sure the status of the investigation, but the other driver was thankfully unhurt, but left their vehicle right here where you see it there. Again, thankfully, despite the fact that this is near 3 schools in DC, no one was hurt. And of course, everyone is very upset about this. There's ongoing meetings about this intersection in this area because of the recent crash that affected 2 school children who happily are injured, but are looked to be in their path of recovery. In any case, city level safety work, it's very close up and personal, I'd say, in summary in this slide. So Sam, you want to go to the next one? Zooming out, when we look at the district overall, here you see a map of fatalities year to date in Washington, D.C. We've had 33 fatalities so far. High injury corridors are where we focus, and those of you who are familiar with Vision Zero cities are probably pretty seen this before, high injury networks, high injury corridors. These are corridors where over 50% of our fatalities occurred in a 3-year period, and over 20% of our traffic injuries. We currently have a fatality rate of over 4 fatalities per 100,000, and that's just compared to around 11 per 100,000 in the U.S. overall. So we're doing better, but we're trying to do, of course, ultimately get to 0 and really outpace not just the rest of the U.S. but other cities to get there. And just overall, again, we have 27,000 reported crashes in a typical year. That's pre-COVID numbers. About 7,000 of those are injury crashes. As I said, there have been 33 fatalities in the district today. You can go to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about this. Now, what I just talked about was high injury corridors. Those are where most of our fatalities do occur, but not all. And there are neighborhood and residential street issues as well. We take comments, requests, safety investigation requests from the public through what we call our traffic safety investigation program. This is a program that takes in currently around 1,400 requests per year, and we evaluate them and apply the appropriate safety measure. And for those of you familiar with DC, this program has recently gotten a lot of attention and has been sped up significantly. And we're in the midst of a fall safety campaign to put in many speed humps and other things. I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. We go to the next one. So speed humps, safety fixes, what works all the time? What are the interventions that we know will affect people night or day, change the way that they're driving? And even though it's very old technology, the speed hump is still a favored tool in our toolbox, especially for local streets and neighborhood areas. We increased significantly our capacity to install these in 2021. We also made it much easier. In the old process, 75% of Block residents would sign a petition. Those of you who've done any sort of organizing in your own neighborhood, or just think about trying to get, say, 75 out of 100 people who live on your block to sign something, this is very challenging. The new process, simple sign off from the local elected body, our ANCs, our advisory group. Next slide. And protected bike lanes is another big area of commitment for the district and getting to safety. Probably most of you on this webinar know this, but it's a safety improvement with has multiple benefits, including lowering speeds overall, typically, which is an underlying safety factor, as well as being really the only specific safety improvement that for cyclist safety. So we're looking at areas where we have high crashes with cyclists. Currently, the new budget we just started a few weeks ago, we're committed to 30 new miles of protected bike lanes in 2025 in the district, a significant increase over the next slide. I don't know if that video is going to play. All right, that might not play. So the other kind of category of fixes we do are things like improved sightlines at intersections, by removing parking, putting in curb extensions and flex posts. And I just want to give a shout out to my former colleague, Emily Delphi, I think I saw on the list, who's done a lot of these around the district before she moved to Richmond. And there's a lot of really great projects that have gone in already and that are getting put in right now as part of this fall safety push. And that is really pulling out the whole toolbox: curb extensions, box signals, driver feedback signs, pedestrian flashers, high visibility crosswalks, really trying to upgrade our safety equipment and designs on the street in all kinds of locations. All right. Oh, now it's playing. Sam, do you want to try to hit play on this? This is just a little gift for me that explains how sightlines work. Okay, it's okay. We don't have to watch them. All right, that's fine. You can go to the next slide. And then finally, actually, maybe just push down. I think that the graph isn't showing up. Finally, our automated traffic enforcement program. DC has one of the country's leading automated enforcement programs. Again, one of the reasons we like this improvement, as well as the others I was just talking about, is they work at all hours. They don't depend on deployments of personnel, and they don't have the potential conflicts that Marco was highlighting in his introduction. The automated enforcement program, we have done a study of recently installed cameras and found that in the speed program alone, we were able to reduce injury crashes by 30% at those locations, which is something we're really excited about. And again, speed is an underlying factor for a lot of safety issues. And therefore, it's really helpful for all kinds of crashes when you bring that speed down. The program is set for an expansion based on different directions, but between our council and our mayor, everyone agrees it should be increased at this point. And we're also, we're going to be putting that out through an accelerated RFP process, as well as some contract increases that we're pushing this fall. And in general, starting October 1, the entire automated enforcement program moved from our police partners at Metropolitan Police Department to DDOT in order to better integrate it with the rest of our safety portfolio. And we've done 45 site assessments since it moving over, and 26 new speed enforcement sites were deployed in FY21. It's been moved for a couple of years, partially, but it's fully moved. So our enforcement program, the automated enforcement program, is a key part. And I can talk more about that in the Q&A. I know Marco and I talked about that. Anyway, I think that's everything I have. Go through the next one. But now you can see the graph. This just shows the, this is an interesting graph. A lot of times people feel like everyone gets a bit of that camera. And this actually shows that a typical camera goes from a little over 1% of drivers getting cited to less than 0.8%. So one in, I guess 110 or something, 120 drivers getting cited. And so what we're seeing, there's two things that are happening when that line goes down. One is we cite fewer, but two is people's speed goes down. And that's where we get that 30% reduction in injury crashes when speeds go down. Right. That's one. That's it. All right, thanks so much, Marco.
Thank you, Linda. I'll turn it over to Chris Bombardier.
Thank you, Marco. I'm not an engineer, so I don't have a slide deck, but I do a lot of the public policy surrounding this issue and have for quite some time, the issue of automated photo enforcement in New York City. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about the path that we followed to get to the point where New York City is now, and some of the obstacles that we had. And of course, it all relates to the topic of this panel. We started, and I started in the photo enforcement government relations world over 10 years ago, representing Vera Mobility. They put the first camera in New York City. It was a red light camera. That was in 1994. It took quite some time to increase that program, and a lot of the issues that some of the other cities face with respect to opposition to photo enforcement we had and we saw in New York. We had to incrementally increase the program each time it was reauthorized. So every time there was a reauthorization bill, we added 25 cameras, 50 cameras. And every time we did that, we were getting better and better data to show how effective the red light cameras are. So in New York City, for example, we've seen reductions in almost immediate reductions in red light running, in crashes, and to me, what is a very big indicator of modifying a driver's behavior, a vast majority of people who receive citations once never got a second one. So whether they realize where the cameras are at troubled intersections, or they just modified their overall behavior, somewhat called a halo effect, where drivers know that there are cameras in the city and you should be careful. But we've encountered every argument legislatively that you can imagine, from it being Big Brother to it being the job of the police to enforce traffic, or one of my favorites, which was raised multiple times, is that there are going to be more collisions, rear end collisions, because people are actually stopping for the red light, which apparently is to some people a bad thing. But the fact is, the cameras cut down on the T-bone collisions, like we just saw in Washington, D.C. this morning, which are some of the worst collisions that you could have. So we incrementally increased that program, but at the same time, Vera Mobility was looking at the other cause of a lot of traffic fatalities, and that was speed. Speed in New York City, particularly around school zones, turned out to be much more of a problem than anyone realized. Working with Transalt, working with the city, we developed a program around school zones and went to the legislature with some preliminary data to show that speeding was at one intersection, or excuse me, at one school zone, we had over 60% of the people speeding. At another, we had multiple during school rush hours in the morning and in the afternoon, multiple people doing 30 to 40 miles an hour over the speed limit. So we were able to show not only is the red light camera program working, but there was a need for a speed camera program. So we brought those findings to the legislature, and we started out with a very modest program, again, to show its value and to generate some data. And that's exactly what it did. The data that we saw almost immediately was very similar to what we saw across the country and what the National Traffic Safety Administration was seeing across the country. And what Linda just indicated they see in Washington, D.C., a 20 to 50% reduction in crashes in zones where cameras are located. But in New York, we became the victim of our own success. The program turned out to be so important to the city that the more the city asked for it, the more the legislature tied in other totally unrelated things to reauthorize the program. So in 2018, when we had 140 school zones operating, and we were making significant progress in reducing crashes, particularly those involving kids walking to and from school, the Senate at the time, which was GOP led, let the program die at the very last minute of the legislative session because some of the things that they had on the table, again, unrelated to cameras, didn't get done. So the camera program went away. Fortunately, the governor, within 2 months, declared a state of emergency and ordered the cameras to be kept on. And that November, the politics changed. We had a Democratic Senate majority win in November. So on January 1st, a freshman senator, Andrew Gennardis from Brooklyn, made this a priority of his. And in a few short months, he, working with an Assemblywoman, Deborah Glick, not only reauthorized the program and kept the 140 cameras operational, but expanded it to the largest in the country. So we went from 140 school zone speed cameras to 750, and we are installing those as we speak. So putting aside the value of reducing crashes and keeping kids safe as they go to and from school, and by the way, I do need to point out, we're talking about a matter of a couple miles per hour is the difference between life and death for a child. So we were particularly keen on reducing speed within school zones, although it's needed throughout the city. And the data we saw when COVID struck and the city got emptied out was amazing. Speeding actually increased because now there were no cars on the road and it turned into a racetrack for some people. But how does this play into the topic of the panel? Obviously, every time you remove the necessity to have a traffic stop, and if you're talking about in a school zone, it's particularly dangerous. If you think about it, not only do you have the speeding vehicle going through a school zone, but you have a secondary vehicle, the police vehicle, having to catch up to the speeding vehicle and affect the stop. And then all of the other things that could potentially go wrong during a traffic stop in and around where kids are going to school. The cameras remove all of that. The cameras take a picture of any car going over 10 miles per hour. Nothing has to be done except review it. The person who is cited gets to watch a video of their vehicle and they get all the data. And a vast majority of them plead guilty. And if they decide not to, they can certainly challenge it like any other ticket. So it has worked. It's working. And I'm really proud that New York City is a leader. Before I close, I do have to note that we play a very small role in this. New York City has led in transportation alternatives, working with Families for Safe Streets. Councilman Rodriguez, who you can hear from after me, and the City Council, all have been tremendous supporters of this program. And frankly, without it, the work that the program does to save lives wouldn't be happening right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. So I believe that Councilmember Ydanis Rodriguez will be joining us shortly. He is actually coming directly from a city council meeting. So as soon as he joins, he will share a few words, part of his presentation. So I want to go on to asking a few questions, Linda, Marisa, and Chris. So at the top of this panel, I didn't frame automated enforcement cameras, including speed safety cameras. And so I want to spend a little bit of time on that, specifically because you Linda and Chris, you've spoken about it just now. So in the Vision Zero and Safe Streets community, there are some who believe that automated enforcement should not be part of the solution towards safer streets, despite their proven life-saving effect. Linda, can you speak about your experience with automated enforcement in Washington, D.C., specifically one of the most persistent concerns, namely that cameras are being inequitably placed and placed disproportionately in majority Black and brown neighborhoods, something that we have heard elsewhere in the country. And then Marisa and Chris, feel free to also speak briefly to this.
Thanks, Marco. Yeah, I guess a couple of things come to mind. I think that the goal of moving ATE, or the Automated Enforcement Program, into the Department of Transportation is to link it more closely with the engineering improvements that we know will also change behavior, or we hope at least it will also change behavior to make it safer. And one goal is to find ways to utilize that kind of expanded toolbox to make it more of an interim solution rather than a permanent solution, something like a safety hazard. And that is our goal, and that's one of the things we need to work on. Now, another thing you talked about is placement of cameras. That is a major issue that we're looking at. The way that we currently place our camera, it's based on two things: community request and review of kind of sighting issues and whether it would be effective. For example, if there's parking in front of a site, we have to be able to locate different types of cameras. There's some very basic evidence there. But So the community request side of that, I think I mentioned the traffic safety investigation requests. Those that's the method by which neighbors can request automated enforcement on a problem location. And so I think it's really important to keep that as part of our toolbox. Getting to like whether that is creating a disproportionate impact, because that would be concerning, right? Disproportionate impact. There's a couple of things that I think of. One is we're weighing the cost to people driving versus the cost of people being hit by those drivers, potentially. That's part of how we kind of think of these cameras relative to the injuries and the deaths that driving is causing. Another is like who is actually receiving these citations. Like the district, as you may know, is between two states. So the District of Columbia itself, only 20% of all our citations go to our residents, people who live in the District of Columbia. 80% is going to people who don't even live in the district. And so that's one measure of like, are we disproportionately impacting our own neighborhoods? And in that sense, I think that we're doing pretty well in managing more like commuter traffic and not people within generally. And then finally, I think a point that Chris made is that it is a strong majority of all drivers that receive a citation receive only one. In our case, it's because like 73% receive only one ever. And so that's a really important thing to think about. We're trying to get compliance, not fines. Like our goal is compliance. If nobody gets a citation, good, we're done here. That's the goal.
Can I just add a little bit to that quick before we move on? I see Ydanis is here. City of Portland also uses automated enforcement. We have the same type of cameras that we use because we have a very serious issue with speed. Earlier in my talk, I had discussed the high-speed crash corridor issues that we were having. And I just wanted to reiterate, what we did is created a dashboard so that the public would have access to why we're choosing the locations we're choosing, how many citations we're giving at those locations, in order to really build trust around why these cameras need to be where they are. And I think that helps remove some of this. I see a lot of questions about equity, and I think it's a super valid question, but speed is the #1 killer on our streets right now. And so we have to address it. And if the cameras are working, then that is the tool that we're going to use. But we really just try to be as transparent as possible so folks understand where we're coming from when we make these choices.
So I just want to close out the discussion about automated enforcement before I turn it over to Councilmember Rodriguez. Why do we need automated enforcement? And the flip side of that is, do we need armed police officers conducting routine traffic enforcement? And this is for Linda, Marisa, Chris.
I'll start. Look, the automated enforcement in New York City in particular has always intended to complement everything else that the city's doing. So whether that be safe street design, whether that be more bike lanes or more police enforcement, we're just a tool in the toolbox. But oftentimes it's difficult to do radar in front of a school or to have the manpower or womanpower to be able to put a police officer at all the schools that the cameras will cover. But also we do make sure that the cameras, they're not like a traffic ticket. They are a relatively small fine. In New York, it's $50. There's no points on your license. It's a deterrent. And it's worked as a deterrent, but it certainly is not the end all and be all. It's just, like I said, a tool.
Linda, Marisa, anything to add?
Yes, the city of Portland is moving towards, we're moving away from the random traffic stops. And we're attempting to move towards this more equitable future where we are not targeting our people of color in an unjust way. And what that's going to look like, we don't know. Like I said, we don't currently have a traffic division. So right now we are doing the best we can with what we have. And these cameras are really our front line. And so do I think they're necessary? Absolutely, they're necessary for where the city of Portland is.
Thank you, Marisa. And now I want to turn it over to Council Member Ydanis Rodriguez, who is chair of the New York City Council Transportation Committee and has just joined us from a City Council meeting. Council Member?
Well, thank you. It's always an honor to be here participating in these conversations about, our street, how to redesign them, how to turn them as places where, focus on pedestrians and cyclists. It has been an honor to be working with, TA, Family for Safe Street, and all the advocates. I feel that we have made a lot of progress as a city in the last couple of years, and that's the first thing that we need to do. We need to celebrate where we are today and take the challenges on how to continue working, bringing more tools, passing more bills, and working with more initiative, and continue making DOT a place where the main goal should be to redesign our street in a way that should be pedestrian and cyclist a focus. I always believe that New York City has that opportunity to be the municipality with the best plan to be pedestrians and cyclist friendly. I think that a lot of things have been done. I had the opportunity to be lead or co-lead on bills and working with you guys to get this to get some important bill to be passed and some initiative. As we work and we were able to get the DOT checklist. We got the DOT crash investigation unit that will transfer the whole work of what we of the collision investigation unit that investigate those cases of hit and run on crashes to be on the DOT without taking the power of those individuals that had investigation experience to do their job, but at the same time to be sure that when a crash happens, DOT should have presence immediately in those locations so that the work of redesigning the street should be a top priority. We also work and we pass the side guard that now have a plan that in the next few years all vehicles under the city they must have the side guard. As also the last bill that we passed also it will mandate that everyone doing business with the city they will have to also, if they use any type of truck, they also will have to install this side guard. And I think that we when we look at the reduction of the speed limit that we've been able to establish in the city, I know that for anyone who is a new New Yorkers or someone who is a new joining the fight, they will probably would think about that's an easy thing, but we know how hard, how difficult it was to pass those bills, and a lot had to do with on the way of how the city had to go to Albany to pass any bill, most of the bill related to the speed camera, related to the speed limit. So I feel that New York City has to work with all the colleagues at Albany. The mayor should also work with the person that represent our city in Albany too, to make some changes in Albany that should allow New York City to have all the power on anything that is related to regulate our transportation. Uh, that's for me something that I hope that with the new administration taking office in January 1st, they should work again with their partners, with the minority leader at the Senate, the Speaker at the Assembly, and use everything that we had to be sure that we should not go to Albany to pass a bill that mainly affect New York City, where we have 8.6 million New Yorkers, and depend on someone who live in some places in our state that they don't have the experience that we had, that they don't have to deal with the same challenges or all those crashes that we have, all those hit and run. And hopefully, we will get rid of COVID-19 very soon. But the other epidemic about the numbers of New Yorkers who are losing their life as a result of crashes, hit and run is something that we can avoid. I think that the city also should work on making more intersections safer. I think that the dancing bar is splitting the time for drivers and pedestrians, separating the time is something that I hope that we can able to do. We need to continue working again with the new leader at City Hall to be sure that we have a more ambitious plan to build more protected bike lane as also bus lane. So I feel that we have made good progress, but I also know that we will have to continue working hard in collaboration as a coalition to be sure that we finish this administration getting few of the things that we still have pending, has also been clear that we should be partnered with the new administration, and everyone, the advocates also should continue playing the role of keeping like a check-in for anyone that will be playing the role, the other role and the administration to be sure that we turn New York City, the municipality, being more pedestrian and cyclist friendly.
Thank you, Council Member. So you listed a number of legislative achievements in New York City, and there's one that I would add to that, which is the streets master plan, which requires the city of New York to build 250 miles of protected bike lanes within 5 years, 150 miles of dedicated bus lanes, 1 million square feet of pedestrian space, and ADA compliant intersections. A number of achievements. One thing that stood out to me in addition to that was one of the most recent achievements that bills that you sponsored. And actually my question here is to Linda, but the bill that is now law is the one you described as requiring DOT to investigate crashes. So following a crash for DOT to respond to the site and focus on the built environment, right? And what I really like about that requirement is that it moves the focus from being on individual culpability, on human errors, and taking a more systemic view and looking at the built environment, the design of the street, the speed. At least that is what it's supposed to do. And I believe that it requires that investigation to be applied for more than 2,000 serious injury crashes annually, which is quite substantial. And so, Linda, I believe in DC you have a similar program. Can you speak about that? How many? What's the size of this program? How many crash locations does your DOT investigate annually? And what has been your experience with these types of DOT investigation that specifically focus on the built environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of how we do this at DDOT, we have, I'd say, 3 different ways that we end up at a site, primary ways, I should say, that relate to safety. And I'll talk about the first 2, and then I'll talk about the third, which I know the most about. The first 2, one is, as I mentioned, a resident safety request. Those are reviewed internally by our traffic engineering and safety division. The second is through our frequent crash or high crash site kind of statistical analysis of crashes. That program is basically ramping up to do 100 intersections or locations a year, typically intersections. We already did, or we're doing 110 this year, 100 next year. And then the third way is more like what you're talking about, which is immediately after a specific crash, DITA investigates the site and puts in countermeasures for safety improvements. That is, right now we're doing that for fatalities and for critical injuries. And those we do it, obviously there's the crash reconstruction, which happens immediately with our partners at our police department. And then within 24 hours, we're briefed on site about the crash by our police department, by our partners in the police, who did the actual investigation and typically the day before, the 24 hours of that. And then on we have we've developed a technique where we can have a lot of people have a hold on their calendar, and then we do a discussion. We do a standardized discussion for every crash, and we do additional meetings if necessary, depending on the circumstances of the crash or the location specifically. And I think a really important part of that is when we get to a location, most of these are fatalities. We're not there to just reconstruct the fatalities. So if, let's just say, if there's a crash late at night, preliminary indications include some influence of alcohol or drugs. It's a single vehicle maybe, and there's no really clear way to determine what else may have caused it. We still look for safety, the opportunities to improve safety at that site. So regardless of the circumstances of the crash. Now, if there's specific crash circumstances, for example, the crash occurred on a left turn, then we would be looking for things very specific to that. But we always look for those opportunities, even if that wasn't a left turn crash. We will always look for those opportunities. And that we bring in, depending on the site, if there's a signal, we make sure signals team is there. If there's street light issues identified in the site visit, we make sure street lights is there, et cetera. So we make sure that we have everybody in the room for that discussion. And that's the kind of the prime point at which things go from there. And there can be additional meetings on top of that, depending on the circumstances. And we've been developing that and honing it over the last, I'd say, 2.5 years. We've got into a really effective and efficient, I think, process right now. And then we create a public memo that describes what we came up with, and as well as, of course, putting any changes into work orders as soon as possible and putting I'm not sure if I made that sound too easy. It's a lot of work. If you work at a city and you're wondering if you should do that, it's a lot of work. And I'm happy to help anybody with specific questions about it. But we have found it beneficial. There's a range of sites. Again, if someone runs off the road and hits a brick wall in the middle of the night, it can be challenging to identify countermeasures. But there are some sites where we've done a lot of really good work. At one site at Piney Branch in Dahlia in Northwest, everybody knows the district, we had sadly lost a young man who was struck while out jogging at night. And we were able to quickly put in pedestrian safety countermeasures that raised the yield rate of drivers from 60% to 90%. And we made even more improvements since then, including some bicycle facilities and some more systematic quarter improvements that should reduce speed in general at that location. And that was all following on a post-fatal crash site.
Thank you, Lynn. So related to street design, Marisa, I really love the engineering equity committee that you are leading in Portland, and that you're focused, as you said, on taking the equitable decisions to the finish line, because so often we see for any type of proposed policy or street design, a watering down of the equitable proposal to begin with, and then throughout the process of essentially negotiating that policy or street design. Marisa, can you speak a little bit to how that committee came about and to what challenges or main issues you are facing?
Yes, absolutely. So the Engineering Equity Committee started, well, when I sort of walked in the door at PBOT 2 years ago, I had hoped to create something like it. It really did take a lot more institutional kind of power than I had when I came in as a new employee. During the summer of 2020, as I alluded to during my talk, the city of Portland went through some pretty radical transformation, I think internally and externally, again, as was well publicized in the media. And during that time, we had a lot of internal communication about really what was the direction that we wanted this bureau to go. And one of the things that kept coming up is how our projects could be sort of more equitable at the end. And really, that's just the role for our maintenance and construction crews and for our engineers. So our city traffic engineer, Wendy Colley, who's just this incredible woman and was our safety engineer prior to becoming the city traffic engineer, partnered with me and really helped me pitch this to higher ups and create an actual sort of working document that showed that this was going to be something that produced results. And also that showed that our engineering teams are not trained on equity. Like historically, it's just not something that we've considered important enough for engineers to review. So through some hard work and some wrangling, we managed to get it to functioning, and we're going through our training and frameworking process right now. The challenges are and remain that there's a stalwart community of engineers who don't believe that this is necessary. That's not entirely the case at PBOT, because we do have a very progressive mentality as an organization. But I would say externally, I present on this quite a bit, and I routinely get multiple engineers who will tell me that this is not our jurisdiction, and that we should not be dealing with this topic. And so that's a tension that you can feel. It's a palpable tension in this industry, but we have to move that direction, because the most vulnerable roadway users have always been low income and people of color. That has always been the case in this country. And until we embrace that across the industry, we're really not going to see the safety requirements that we need across all roads.
Thank you, Marisa. And I have an additional question for you, and then a similar question for Councilmember Rodriguez around safety and what it means to you. So Marisa, what does safety mean to you in the context of transportation, street safety, and policing? And then to Councilmember Rodriguez, what does safety mean to you and your constituents? So starting with Marisa, what does
safety for
safety means to you in the context of transportation, street safety, and policing?
Sure. Safety for me means, and this isn't really me, this is really the PBOT definition, safe from harassment, safe from physical violence, safe from verbal altercations. Safety is not inside of our right of way the way that PBOT envisions it now. Is less about our safety from cars and more about feeling like this is my community and I can walk down the street day or night and know that I will make it to my destination. That's really the way that we're envisioning safety now at PBOT.
Yeah. I think that, for me, it's about pedestrians and cyclists knowing that they are walking and riding the bike in peace, that there's not going to be a surprise or a blow for that. It's like similar to a weapon or mass destruction that can suddenly go and hit. And unfortunately, as we're speaking right now, we never know when the last victim is going to be. And usually, like most of those, lack of safety happen in our intersections. It happened when the drivers unfortunately passed a red light or didn't respect the stop sign, or he or she was drunk. And it will happen when those individuals.
Councilmember, it is a little bit hard to hear. Yes, that's better. Your mic was a little bit far away.
Those individuals who are riding vehicles, and I gotta say, I'm one of those who own vehicles as I also own pedestrians. But the reality is that in our city, we only have 1.4 million New Yorkers that own vehicles. 7 million New Yorkers are pedestrians, or they ride, they use a bike, they use a taxi, they use a ferry. And I think that, you know, what we have to understand, and I'm happy that also we have, let's say, Eric Adden standing 2 days ago with this street block talking about how when we plan, we have left also the underserved community out of the conversation. And I always challenge my brothers and sisters, like look at the faces of people riding the bike in New York City. Beside the street, the fast food worker delivers. Most likely that you will see close to Chelsea Pier, that you will see down 96th Street in the Upper East Side. They are not, they don't include most of them. You don't see a lot of faces of Black and Latino. And a lot had to do that we had not worked on policy, thinking about everyone. Just think about how we started with City Bike. City Bike didn't started thinking about, you know, this is an important motor transportation to connect working class New Yorkers. City Bike from the beginning was about providing additional motor transportation to those New Yorkers who work down 59th Street. Even though they have great motor transportation with the trains and the buses, especially the train, 10, 15 minutes away, but we add an additional transportation, creating the City Bike. Fine with that. We need to do that. But when will we become understanding that this is a way of racism on how we do policy? When do we think about the South Bronx? When do we think about those individuals who live in the underserved community where people cannot pay a membership of Zip Card? They cannot pay a membership of City Bike. And then we are expanding to places, but the services are not affordable to working class. And then also we do a lot of things on planning, creating, you know, we provide $185 million in incentive through EDC to the private sector that create jobs. When, or how, or why we don't double that incentive to the private sector that create good paid jobs in the underserved community? So that as we have a lot of great brothers and sisters who live in the Upper East Side, who live in the Upper West Side, who work 10 minutes away, that they can work, they can take a bike. We have the other part of New York, it's like the apartheid of people that they have to travel an hour and a half every day, going from Inglewood, from the South Bronx, to work in a cafeteria at the JFK. So I feel that, you know, we have to continue thinking about policy, everything that we have done it, but one day, and I hope that this is the moment, because one thing that we should learn from COVID-19 is that, yes, everyone can die because of COVID-19, but why most of the people who died, they were the poorest one? How do we look at transportation? Why people who have pre-health conditions, they were dealing with asthma and obesity? Most of them, they were brown. And most of them live in community that they don't have a nice waterfront, not down 96th Street. We don't have those tools above 96th Street to Washington High in the Bronx. So I challenge my progressive who live downtown, who live midtown, to say, let's walk through those communities. Let's share that privilege. Until we address that reality, we will continue having our city. Even most of the hit and run, most of the crashes happen in the underserved community, because still we have so many intersections in the Bronx, in places without a stop sign. Who is still looking for that? So for me, I think it's, again, I all about celebrating the accomplishment, but also challenging ourselves to also have a more wider citywide commitment to share the privilege that we have in certain zip codes of our city of New York.
Thank you, Councilman. But I have a somewhat of a follow-up question to that. You talked about what is needed, and you've described some of the issues of inequitable street safety, allocation of measures and inequitable transportation options. One thing that really struck me with the two recent polls, one by Siena College, that showed extremely high support for a host of traffic safety and street safety measures, specifically among Latinx New Yorkers, support in the 80s and 90th percentile when you combine strong and some what support, but extremely high level of support, specifically among Latinx New Yorkers. You, of course, as transportation chair, work for the entire city. Your district in Upper Manhattan has a large Latinx population. Against this backdrop, there's also a lot of opposition that is faced when we want to install a dedicated bus lane, protected bike lane, pedestrian safety measures. How do you navigate, as an elected official, the obvious need for traffic safety measures with some constituents' strong opposition to, for example, losing some parking spaces?
I think that one thing that I have learned in my life is that, first of all, I know about social justice. And I always challenge, my brothers and sisters who are progressive to always think about progressivism from the point of view about economic justice. And if you think about economic justice, we have to think about transportation. So I'm all about working around initiatives, not based about if they are popular or not, but thinking about what is the legacy that we have to leave for the to the present and future generation. I feel that I live that experience when it comes to the Dykeman bike lane. I don't have a community TA in England. Like those meetings happening at the community board 12, and I was crushed by most of the constituency that I represent that went to the community board. 98% of those voices, they went against the bike lane at Dykeman. But I was not looking to be popular. I think that was the right thing to do. However, I do it because I know that that's the only resources that I have right now. But I question my other part of most of the middle class and upper class cyclists that have never think about why, as we have the Riverside Trust that is able to raise so much money and is able to have a beautiful waterfront for cyclists to ride the bike, how much are we doing also to make that whole waterfront for cyclists and pedestrians all around Manhattan? Well, I can tell you why. Because most people who live in the top of Manhattan, they're poor. And unfortunately, we only see that we are all equal when we are dealing with a natural disaster. But when those moments pass, we always go back to a place. COVID hit us. Most people who are middle class, upper class, they went to the Humps. They were not having 3 generations of people living in one apartment. And those people are potential cyclists too. So when we talk again about the opposition and resistance, I also I give my fight because I do believe that it is important to redesign our streets. I don't think it is correct that we have developers that we demand from developers to provide a numbers of parking spots in the building. And I think that request had put our city also as a side of those individual or institutions responsible for putting thousands of cars in the street, because when someone built a building, they had to provide 150, 200 parking spots to the residents. And instead of having that requirement, I do believe that request should be used instead to make those apartments deeply affordable, or that request should be used to also improve transportation need that we have in the surrounding area. We can make our city walkable, but we have to create good paid jobs in those neighborhoods so that people will not have to be traveling. I'm all about, working together to be sure that the city will have more control of the MTA. We should have more members in the board. We should also have more to say about what is the services that we expect from our trains and from our buses. We need to learn from Mexico, we need to learn from Colombia when it came to SBS, to BRT. But we have to also look again, our reality in our city is that we live in two different places. A zip code that is safe, a zip code that is fine, to see how the expansion of cyclists is happening in big time. And you heard from Senator Schumer. He said, there's not a day that I have more fun or join the day when I get in more than when I get into the bike. I had the opportunity to be disconnected. I had the opportunity to use a good quality air, but that opportunity is not there every day for our working class who live in places in the Bronx that they don't know when the shooting will happen. So it's not only that it's not safe because someone can be hit by a car. There's community that there's no safe because the shooting and the violence in the street. So in order for us also to take more New Yorkers to say it is safe for you to get into the bike, we also have to improve the safety in the street by redesigning, by bringing more protected bike lane. But also we need to persuade more New Yorkers who are in the private sector to say, we will invest more in those communities to create more good paid job, to reduce the level of violence. So,
thank you, Council Member. As we're coming to the end, I just want to give a heads up to a question I'll be asking each panelist for a very quick answer, which is, what does self-enforcing streets mean to you? And when do you believe that your locality, wherever you are, can achieve something approximating your idea of fully self-enforcing streets? Before I ask each of you that, for a quick answer from each of you, just want to note, I haven't ignored the questions from the audience. I've seen throughout that our panelists and others have been diligently answering the questions. There's two I want to highlight. One is the question: are the 1.7 million New Yorkers who own a car predominantly white? I do know in New York City, the majority of white New Yorkers are more likely, yes. We do know that car owners' average household income is slightly higher than, or is higher than non-car owning households. We also know that those who travel by means other than who travel by bus and subway are predominant Black and brown, and also lower income. Another question is about the racial equity implications of automated enforcement locations and 1.47 million citations. And to that, I would just note it's relatively little compared to, for every person who gets a ticket. In New York City, for example, each camera ticket is only $50. That is equivalent roughly to filling that up. In some places, though, in the country, it does rise above that to $150. But in New York City, I can certainly say it's only $50. As we are close to running out of time, I want to post that question for a very quick answer from each, starting with Marisa, then going to Linda, then Chris, and then Councilmember Rodriguez. So what does self-enforcing streets mean to you, and when do you believe that your locality can achieve something approximating your idea of fully self-enforcing streets?
Self-enforcing streets right now in Portland is the sort of current reality that we're in. I think we hit it prematurely, but we are actively working towards streets where every member of our community feels safe walking, biking, scootering, or driving.
Thank you. Linda? You're muted, Linda.
It's not a Zoom meeting about that. Hi. So I think that the goal to me is to design to get the outcomes we need, and that includes the design and the operation. That includes signals. That includes our automated program, and the way to get there, the path to get there, I think, has to run through. In addition to everything we talked about, mode shift, getting to the point where everyone can use different modes besides driving for other trips, and that has a lot of different facets from land use to housing underneath it too. So it's a big bundle, but to me that's a critical component because that will contribute to our ability to reconfigure our major arterials, which are where most of our high-end corridors are, and get to the city that we all want for our.
Thank you, Linda. Chris?
Marco, I'll let the city experts tackle this one, so I'll give my time over to the council member.
I just think that we need to invest on educational awareness so that our New Yorkers who they don't see the benefit of riding a bike or walking in the street also know that how important is that for their health, for this emotional part of their body too. As also, I feel that the city should also sit down and plan better on creating a more good paid job so that no one should be traveling more than 20 minutes from where they live. But in order to accomplish that goal, we need to make some changes, building affordable housing, those communities. We need to make the parks safer than what we have it today. As also, we need to be sure that, you know, we create good paid job in those communities. So that's my vision.
Thank you very much, Councilmember. So we have come to the end of this panel. Thank you to everyone who joined to view and participate with questions, and to each of our panelists. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your insight with us today. And thank you to the amazing staff at Transportation Alternatives for organizing this conference. People should, I encourage you to tune in at 4:45 p.m. for the exciting Vision Zero vignettes. That's 4:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So thank you very much. Have a good day.